Hi guy, welcome back my channel. CBS Beyond the Gates spoilers. Ted did not expect the night to end with him standing frozen in the dark, staring at a doorway that suddenly felt like the mouth of a trap. He had come near Nicole's place for a reason that made sense when he left something practical, something controlled, something that could be explained to himself without admitting how much of his life still orbited around her. Maybe he was on his way to meet Shanice as planned. Maybe he just happened to pass by with the kind of restless momentum that had been driving him lately. The same momentum that had been pushing him through Genoa City's pressure cooker atmosphere, where every glance, every rumor, every innocent connection could become a weapon. He told himself he was fine. He told himself he was past the point where Nicole's choices could reach into him and twist his insides. But the truth was that the divorce line on paper had never translated into a clean emotional amputation. The history was still alive, still hot, still capable of bleeding without warning. Then he saw Kyle. At first it didn't compute because it didn't belong in the mental map Ted carried of his life. Kyle was supposed to exist in a different category, someone familiar, someone he had trusted enough to let close, someone he could place in the comfortable space between friend and ally, where loyalty might be messy but it wasn't supposed to be treacherous. In Genoa City, Ted had already watched too many alliances shift in real time, watched too many people betray each other with calm smiles, and he had promised himself he wouldn't be naive again. But seeing Kyle there near Nicole's home at that hour, with that ease, hit him like a door slammed unexpectedly against his chest. A second earlier, Ted had been moving. The next, he was a statue held in place by disbelief. He tried to rationalize it, because that was his reflex, reduce chaos to a shape that could be endured. Maybe Kyle had come for something harmless. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Nicole needed help with something. Maybe this was just an awkward coincidence that would embarrass everyone and dissolve under the light of morning. But Ted's mind couldn't finish the thought, because his eyes kept collecting details faster than his denial could process them. Kyle stood as if he belonged there. The kind of comfort that didn't come from a first visit, the quiet intimacy of timing, the unmistakable sense that this was not an accident but a routine. And then the intimacy became undeniable. It might have been a kiss, something to warm, to close, to deliberate, to be mistaken for a friendly goodbye. Or it might have been even worse in the way it lingered. Because sometimes what breaks you isn't the act itself but the evidence of its aftermath. Kyle stepping out in the early hours, leaving Nicole's home the way a man leaves a place where he has slept well, satisfied, unhurried, wearing that subtle confidence that comes from being wanted. Either version carried the same message. Either version rewrote Ted's reality in a single brutal stroke. The scene didn't just sting. It rearranged his internal structure, as if every fragile compromise he'd built since the split was suddenly smashed and exposed. The first thing Ted felt wasn't anger. It was shock so sharp it made the air taste metallic. His body reacted before his mind did, heart thudding, throat tightening, hands going cold. He stood there fighting the instinct to step forward, to make noise, to confront, to demand explanations that would only humiliate him further. He was an adult, a man who understood how messy relationships could be, a man who had survived worse than a painful surprise. Yet this hit different because it wasn't only about Nicole. It was about the way betrayal multiplies when it comes from two directions at once. Nicole was his ex-wife, yes, and that word ex was supposed to mean he no longer had a claim. But the emotional residue of marriage is not so easily dismissed, especially when the wound is still tender enough to ache at random hours. And Kyle was not supposed to be a blade. Ted's mind snapped between two truths that could not coexist peacefully. One truth insisted that Nicole was free, that she owed him nothing, that this should not matter. The other truth rose like a howl from somewhere deeper, something raw and primitive that did not care about logic or legality. She was still the center of a story Ted hadn't finished living, and Kyle had stepped into it like he was entitled to the role. That was the moment the shock curdled into something darker. Not just jealousy, but humiliation. Not just pain, but rage. Because it wasn't simply that Nicole had moved on, it was that she had moved on with someone who existed inside Ted's circle, someone who had looked Ted in the eye. Someone who had benefited from Ted's trust. In Genoa City, where power shifts happen in whispers and smiles, Ted had always taken pride in reading people. He had convinced himself he could sense a lie before it landed. Yet here he was, blindsided. That realization lit a second fire inside him, fury at Nicole and Kyle, but also fury at himself for ever believing the rules were different for them. His thoughts began to race with the cruel clarity that arrives when the heart is cornered. How long had this been happening? How many moments had Ted missed? How many conversations had he shared with Kyle while this secret sat between them like a loaded gun? Ted's imagination turned vicious, filling in blanks with worst-case pictures. Not because he wanted to torture himself, but because his mind demanded a complete narrative. And when it couldn't get the truth, it manufactured one. Every memory involving Nicole became suspect. Every gesture from Kyle in recent weeks suddenly looked like camouflage. Ted started replaying interactions, searching for microsignals of guilt, a pause, a look away, an unnecessary politeness. Nothing felt safe. Even the past began to rot under the weight of this new information. And then came the sense of being trapped. Because Ted knew what this would do to him if he reacted impulsively. He could see it as clearly as a headline: Ted loses control. Ted becomes the story. Ted proves everyone right about his volatility. In the world they lived in, reputation mattered. Perception mattered. One misstep could turn a personal wound into a public collapse. He felt the temptation to storm up to the door, to explode, to reclaim a sense of power by forcing the truth out into the open. But he also felt the danger of that temptation. Rage promised relief, but it also promised consequences. Ted's pride demanded confrontation, his survival instinct demanded restraint. That internal tug-of-war made him feel like he was splitting in half. He forced himself to stand still, to breathe, to keep his face calm even though no one was watching. He tried to tell himself that he was above this. He tried to tell himself that he would walk away and let the world spin without him. But his heart refused to obey. The betrayal had landed in the part of him that still craved respect, still craved significance, still wanted to believe that his life with Nicole meant something that could not be casually replaced. Even if he had no right to her, he believed he had a right not to be mocked by circumstance, not to be blindsided by someone he had treated as a friend. In that moment, Ted's pain sharpened into purpose. He did not simply decide he was angry. He decided he would not be powerless. The rage inside him began to organize itself, stripping away softness, burning away hesitation. He could feel his feelings becoming strategy, the way they often do in a city where emotions are rarely allowed to exist, without being turned into leverage. Ted's mind started assembling a vow. It shouted, not dramatic, but firm and cold. Nicole and Kyle had crossed a line that Ted didn't even realize he still drew. And now they would have to face the fallout of that line being enforced. Because this did not feel like a simple romantic development. To Ted, it felt like a betrayal with intent. The kind that suggests someone thought they could get away with it. The idea that Nicole might have moved on wasn't what destroyed him. It was the idea that Nicole and Kyle might have chosen this knowing Ted would eventually find out. And still believing they could manage him, contain him, minimize him. That was what made Ted's pride flare. He would not be managed. He would not be reduced to a footnote in their story. He stepped back into the shadows, not because he was retreating, but because he was gathering himself. The anger was still there, roaring, demanding release, but now it had an edge of control. His jaw tightened until it ached. His pulse hammered in his ears. The world looked slightly unreal, like the night had turned into a stage set built to humiliate him. Ted felt the urge to call someone, to lash out, to do something that would make the pain stop. But he didn't. He held the moment inside him like a burning coal. Because he knew that coal could become a weapon if he carried it carefully. He didn't move toward the door. He didn't announce himself. He didn't give Nicole or Kyle the satisfaction of seeing him unravel in real time. Instead, he turned away slowly, forcing his feet to obey the decision his mind had made. Each step away from the house felt like a betrayal of his own emotions. Like he was swallowing his rage instead of honoring it. But beneath that struggle, another conviction was forming. This was not over. This was the beginning of something. By the time Ted reached the end of the street, his shock had hardened into something colder than jealousy. It was resolve. He kept replaying the Senecas or early morning departure. It didn't matter until it stopped being a wound and became a symbol. A symbol of what they had done. A symbol of the disrespect. A symbol of the game they thought they could play. Ted realized he no longer cared about understanding why it happened. Motive didn't soften betrayal. Motive didn't erase humiliation. What mattered was that the line had been crossed and that Ted now had a choice. Absorb the insult quietly, or make sure the people who hurt him felt the weight of what they had triggered. And that was when the most dangerous part of Ted woke up, the part that could smile while planning. The part that could endure pain without showing it. The part that believed consequences were the only language people truly respected. He told himself he would not act rashly, not because he had forgiven them, but because he wanted the retaliation to be clean, deliberate, and impossible to dismiss. He would find a way to make Nicole and Kyle look at each other one day and realize the moment they thought they were winning was the moment they started losing. Ted reached his car, but he didn't get in right away. He stood there with his hand on the door, staring into nothing, as if the night itself could answer him. His chest still hurt. His pride still burned. Yet underneath it all, his mind was already moving, already pulling threads. already imagining the exact moment when the truth would hit back. He didn't need an audience tonight. He didn't need revenge right this second. He only needed certainty. And he had it. Because now Ted knew exactly what Nicole and Kyle were capable of. And exactly what he was about to become capable of in return. He finally slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat in silence as the engine idled, the glow from the dashboard painting his face in harsh, unforgiving light. His phone remained untouched, but his thoughts were already dialing the future. Already arranging the next encounter, already deciding which version of himself would show up. Then a new notification lit the screen, brief, sudden. Impossible to ignore. Ted's eyes narrowed as he realized the night was not finished with him yet. Because whatever appeared on that phone promised one thing with terrifying clarity. This betrayal was only the first spark. And the next move would force Ted to choose between exposing them or destroying them. The Beyond the Gates CBS Spoilers channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the series from the perspective of a longtime fan. This allows viewers to gain deeper, more objective, and interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the series.